The night was warm but cloudless, and the stars seemed especially bright against the charcoal dark sky. Alex was sitting in his usual position on the roof of a small house on the outskirts of the city, where his telescope was pointed into the boundless space. It was his refuge, a place where he came every night to break away from the noisy world and immerse himself in dreams of distant galaxies of life beyond Earth. He was what could be called a lonely dreamer. For him, space has always been more than just stars and planets. It was filled with possibilities, answers to questions that Alex had asked himself since childhood. But this night it was different. He felt strangely uneasy, as if the stars were speaking to him in a language he couldn't understand. Suddenly, his gaze was attracted by a bright flash on the horizon resembling a falling meteorite. Only it wasn't an ordinary meteorite. Alex knew instantly that something was wrong. The object did not fall randomly, as is usually the case with cosmic bodies, but moved purposefully, as if controlled. His trajectory was clear and straight, as if someone was guiding. Alex dropped everything, quickly packed his things, and without hesitation, ran to the car. The forest in which he saw the flash was not far away, just a few kilometers away. His heart was pounding wildly in his chest, as if it already knew what lay ahead. He couldn't explain the feeling, but something told him that something extraordinary was going to happen today. His hands trembled slightly as he drove the car along the winding roads, and his eyes did not leave the place where the sun had recently shone brightly on the horizon. When he got there, Alex turned off the engine and continued his journey on foot. The forest seemed gloomy and quiet to him. It seemed that the whole world froze, waiting for something. Only a faint wind shook the branches of the trees, adding even more tension. Alex moved cautiously, following his instincts. Somewhere ahead, beyond the trees, he saw a faint flicker light coming from what he took to be a fallen object. He slowly made his way through the dense thickets and finally came out into a small clearing. What he saw made him stop. There was a strange object lying right in the middle of the clearing. It was oval in shape, metallic, but the surface was covered with a strange soft glow, as if the metal itself was emitting light. He had never seen anything like it. A ship, but it was too small for a conventional spacecraft. Its dimensions did not exceed several meters in length, and it did not emit any sound or smell of burning, as it would have been during an emergency landing. But that wasn't the most surprising thing. A little further from the ship, among the tall grass, the female figure was slender, graceful. Her body shone with a soft blue light. Her skin was smooth, almost translucent, as if the light was coming from inside. Alex froze, his breath caught in his throat. He couldn't believe his eyes. She was unlike any other person he had ever seen. Her eyes were large, slightly larger than those of humans, and glowed with a faint purple hue. She was beautiful, but this beauty was alien, almost unearthly. Her long hair, as if woven from light, gently swayed, although there was no wind around. Alex took a step forward, unable to take his eyes off the stranger. His mind was struggling to comprehend what was happening. She was an alien, that was obvious. What seemed to be just a dream, an astronomer's fantasy, has now become a reality, and she was standing right in front of him. The stranger slowly turned her head and met his gaze. At that moment, their eyes connected, and Alex felt something strange, as if an invisible spark had passed between them. It was a moment that changed everything. His fear disappeared, replaced by curiosity and a strange sense of attraction. He felt that she was not dangerous. There was no hostility in her eyes, only surprise and perhaps a little fear. She took a step forward, and Alex automatically took a step back, but immediately stopped. They were standing a few meters apart, and he suddenly realized that he didn't know what to do next. How do you talk to a creature that came from another planet? Thoughts of scientific discoveries, contact with extraterrestrial civilizations flashed through my head, but all this was unimportant at that moment. She was standing in front of not just an alien, but someone who seemed to be trying to understand him as much as he understood her. She gently raised her hand, and Alex felt his heart speed up again. Her gesture was gentle, almost human, but there was something indescribable about it, as if she wanted to show that she did not intend to cause harm. He slowly raised his hand in response, and silence fell between them. This silence was not frightening, but rather filled with the expectation of something big.
Where are you from?
Alex whispered, not knowing if she would understand him. She didn't answer, but her eyes brightened, and Alex felt a faint vibration in the air. It was something strange, not like a sound, but he realized that she was trying to establish a connection with him. Her language was not verbal, but rather mental. He could sense her thoughts, her intentions. She came from another star, from a distant galaxy, and her mission was scientific. She was exploring the Earth and happened to be in this place after the accident.
Do you understand me?
Alex said it out loud, but there were no familiar sounds in response. However, there was a faint echo in his head. She understood him. He couldn't explain exactly how it happened, but it was real. They stood there for a few more minutes, studying each other. Alex couldn't believe this was happening. He had always dreamed of contacting an extraterrestrial civilization, but even in his wildest dreams, he had not imagined that it would be so. Personally, she wasn't just a scientist or a researcher. There was something more in her eyes, something he couldn't read right away, but he felt it more clearly every moment.
Can you fix the ship?
Alex asked, although he wasn't sure if she would understand it. She nodded, but the gesture was slow, as if she wasn't sure. Alex realized that she needed help. It was risky, but he couldn't leave her here alone, especially if her ship was damaged. He knew that if someone else found her, it could lead to disaster. People were not ready for such contact, and probably never will be.
Come with me,
he said, gesturing towards his car. She looked at him and then at her ship, as if weighing her options. Her face expressed doubt, but eventually she took a step towards him. Alex turned and started walking back to the car, feeling her presence moving behind him. It was the beginning of something huge, but he didn't know how much yet. Anxiety still sat in his chest, but it was mixed with a strange feeling of joy. He was not alone in this world. And even though they had just met, he felt that this meeting would change everything. They got to the car. Alex opened the door and motioned for her to get into the passenger seat. She hesitated a little, clearly studying the mechanism of the machine, which was alien to her. Surprise flashed in her eyes as she carefully sat inside, trying to figure out how everything worked. Alex got behind the wheel and started the engine. The car slowly pulled away, and he looked at it out of the corner of his eye. She was looking at the road. Her face was calm, but there was a huge inner strength in this calmness. Their journey was just beginning, but Alex already knew that this meeting was more than just a random collision of two worlds. It was the beginning of something new, something that could change his life and perhaps the fate of the entire planet. After that unusual night, everything in Alex's life changed. Leon, as he began to call the stranger, although her name sounded more melodious and difficult for human perception, was now a part of his life. She was from another planet, from a distant galaxy, and her appearance on Earth was the result of the accident of her ship. But for some reason, instead of feeling fear or anxiety, Alex felt strangely calm and confident that he had made the right choice by bringing her home. He understood that she was here temporarily, and sooner or later she would have to fly back to her world. But while they were together, everything else seemed unimportant. He hid her in his house, trying to do everything possible so that no one would find out about her existence. Their contact with the outside world was kept to a minimum. Alex rarely left the house, and Leon almost never left his small suburban area. His house was small and secluded, which played into his hands. He knew that the human world was not ready for such a discovery yet, and he was afraid that if someone found out about Leon, it would lead to disastrous consequences for her and possibly for himself. The first days passed in silence. Leon was a mystery to Alex. She rarely spoke, and even when she did, her words were short and simple. She mostly communicated through looks or subtle gestures. Her body, as if composed of light, radiated a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration. Alex felt it every time he was near her, as if her presence affected the surrounding space. It was mesmerizing and frightening at the same time. It was as if she was not just a living being, but a particle of the universe itself. He never asked her about her world for fear of disturbing her thoughts, but he saw her from time to time sitting by the window, looking at the stars with an expression that could only be described as longing. She missed her home, that was obvious. Alex couldn't understand her feelings because she came from a place that was millions of light years away, and she might never return there. And yet, despite all her aloofness and silent sadness, a subtle bond began to form between them. Alex made her breakfast every morning, a simple human meal that she slowly learned to enjoy. Eating on her planet was something else, more an energy process than a physical consumption of food. But she was interested in exploring all the flavors and textures that were new to her, even if sometimes they seemed strange and unexpected to her. He remembered how he had once offered her fruits and how she had looked at them carefully before carefully tasting. Her face changed when she tried to understand a new taste. It was like children discovering the world for the first time. One morning, when Alex was cooking breakfast in the kitchen again, Lion quietly entered the room. Her footsteps were barely audible, as if she herself was part of the air. He felt her presence long before she appeared, as if a new energy had appeared in the house, subtle but tangible. She stopped at the window, looking out at the garden, and Alex noticed that her face was calm but thoughtful.
Are you okay? What is it?
He asked, a little nervous from the silence that had hung between them for a long time. She turned her head, her huge eyes catching his gaze again. There was a depth to them that Alex couldn't explain. It was more than just the look of a living being. There was a universe in him, and that was no exaggeration. When she looked at him, he felt that endless spaces, stars, galaxies, and unknown worlds were opening up before.
I'm studying.
She replied softly, her voice like a melody that barely touched the ear, as if she wasn't talking but singing her thoughts. Alex nodded, realizing that she was learning not only about life on Earth, but also how to be a part of this world, at least for a short time. He continued his usual activities, but he couldn't help but notice how she watched him from time to time. Her gaze was not persistent, but it was always present, as if she was trying to understand something about him, about his nature, about humanity in general. Over time, a kind of routine began to appear between them. Alex worked from home, doing astronomy and space exploration, but now every night he felt that his views on the stars had changed. He no longer looked at them with the same detached dreaminess as before. Now he knew that somewhere out there among those stars was Lion's house, and this knowledge made his work more meaningful but also sadder at the same time. The stars that had once seemed so far away and inaccessible to him now carried a real life that he could never touch. Lion, although she was an alien, began to find joy in simple earthly things. She could sit in the garden for hours, watching the birds that flew to the feeder, or look at the flowers growing among the grass. Her slender fingers touched the petals with such care, as if she was afraid of breaking the fragile structure of these earthly plants. Alex found himself thinking more than once that her presence made his life more intense, more conscious. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the fact that time was running out. Lian was rebuilding her ship, slowly, step by step, using technologies that Alex couldn't understand. He saw her sitting for hours in her room, surrounded by strange instruments glowing in different colors, and her focused face expressed her determination to return home. And every time he saw it, his heart, he understood that her stay on Earth was temporary, and the closer they got, the harder it became to think about her leaving. One evening, when the sun was already starting to set, they were sitting on the porch of the house, watching the sunset. It became a familiar ritual for them. Sunsets were one of those moments when they could silently enjoy the beauty of the earth. Lion was looking at the horizon again. Her face was calm, but there was something new in her eyes, something Alex couldn't understand.
Are the sunsets on your planet the same?
He asked quietly, without turning to her. She paused for a moment before answering.
No.
Her voice was barely audible, but there was something melancholic about it.
The stars are brighter on my planet, and there is no such light as here.
Alex nodded, realizing that she was talking not only about the light of the sun, but also about the world itself. He knew that Lian was used to a different life, a different reality. And yet, despite her desire to return, he felt that she had begun to appreciate what she had found here on Earth. Despite her cold calmness, Alex felt that there was more between them than just a connection between two beings. Their relationship was built on a thin thread that stretched from the stars to the Earth, from its distant world to its familiar reality. And this thread was getting stronger every day. Even without communicating often in words, they felt each other. When she was around, his world seemed different, deeper, more meaningful. The nights were getting colder, but they continued to sit on the porch, sheltering in silence. Lian, despite her mystery, was no longer a stranger to Alex. She became a part of his life, albeit temporary. He was afraid to admit to himself that he had begun to fall in love with her. It seemed impossible and absurd because they were so different, belonging to completely different worlds. But every move she made, every look, tied him more and more to her. One night, when they were sitting in silence again, Alex couldn't stand it and whispered softly,
Will you stay?
Lian slowly turned to him, her eyes shining in the darkness again. She didn't answer right away, but there was something in her gaze that he couldn't quite understand. Was it regret or maybe hope?
I do not know.
She finally whispered. Her voice was low, almost imperceptible, but it made so much sense. Alex felt his heart tighten. He knew he couldn't ask her to stay. Her home was there, millions of light years away, and he couldn't keep her here. But he also couldn't deny that he was getting more attached to her every day. Their worlds were too different, but it didn't matter at this moment. It's been a few weeks since Lian appeared in Alex's life. At first, their bond was something elusive, a tacit understanding growing amid cultural differences and the stunning mystery of her origins. But over time, this connection has become not only stronger, it has become something much more intimate than he could ever imagine. Something that cannot be described in words, because words simply could not convey all the depth that arose between them. It was a connection that did not depend on language or gestures, something deeper, something that was born in them despite all the differences. Alex often woke up early in the morning and looked at Lian while she was sleeping in another room. Her breathing was barely perceptible, almost imperceptible, as if she existed on a different frequency, somewhere between reality and sleep. He couldn't help but admire her strange beauty. Her skin glowed with a soft blue light in the dark, and her long hair seemed to move as if under the influence of an invisible wind. She didn't look like a human, but that was what made her so mesmerizing. Lian rarely spoke. Her words were as quiet as the wind and always sounded with a certain caution, as if she was afraid to disturb the harmony they had created. But Alex could feel her even when she was silent, when she tilted her emotions from her small gestures, when she tilted her head slightly, when her gaze stayed on him longer than usual, when she barely touched his hand. One evening, when they were sitting in the garden watching the sunset, Lian, as usual, did not say anything. Sunsets became their ritual, a time when they could sit silently next to each other, enjoying the silence. Alex was already used to this silent communication. But this time it was something else. Lian was sitting closer to him than usual, her shoulder almost touching his, and he felt her warmth, although his mind told him that her body should be as cold as the cosmos from where she came. He turned to her and their eyes met. At that moment, Alex felt a strange excitement. Her eyes shone faintly, but there was something deep in them, something he couldn't ignore. His heart started beating faster, but he didn't know what to say. Words seemed unnecessary at that moment. The whole point of their relationship was not in words, but in what they felt when they were together. Finally, Lian spoke, her voice as soft as the wind.
Your world, so warm.
These simple words penetrated deep into his mind. She talked not only about physical warmth, but also about the emotional bond they had begun to build. Alex couldn't help but smile a little.
Do you like it here? What is it?
He asked without looking away. Lian nodded. Her face remained calm, but her eyes betrayed something more, the depth of feelings that she may not have fully realized. She was not made for human emotions. Her world was far from such concepts as affection or love. But here on Earth, surrounded by simple human joys, she began to discover something new. Alex could feel the tension building between them. Not an alarming one, but rather a tension of attraction, something inevitable that was going to happen. He couldn't ignore his own feelings, even though it seemed so ridiculous. She was a creature from another galaxy. Their lives should have been separated by millions of light years. But here, at this moment, they were closer to each other than they could ever imagine. Her fingers lightly touched his arm. It was a light, barely noticeable touch, but it meant more to Alex than any words. This touch was a confirmation that there was more between them than just friendship or mutual curiosity. It was something deeper, something that both of them had begun to realize but could not yet express. Their hands remained joined for a moment before Lion slowly pulled away, her face returning to a calm expression, but her eyes still shone with a faint light. This night was a turning point for them. After her, Alex couldn't ignore his feelings. He began to catch himself that her every move, every look had become something for him that made his heart beat faster. He couldn't help but think about her even when she wasn't around. Every morning he woke up with the thought that her presence in his life was becoming more and more significant. And although she remained quiet and mysterious, also began to show her feelings. She no longer shunned him as she had before. Now they spent more time together. She watched his daily activities, studying how he cooked food, how he worked with a telescope, or wrote his notes. Her interest in human life was not superficial. She sincerely sought to understand everything about Alex. And the more she got to know him, the more her affection grew. Sometimes she watched him when he was lost in thought, his face illuminated by the light of the screen or the moon shining through the window. At such moments, Leon felt something new for herself, a feeling that her people had never experienced. It wasn't just affection, it was something deeper that she couldn't describe. But every time her gaze rested on him, she felt her heart begin to beat differently. One day, when they were sitting on the couch, Alex, unable to stand the tension, slowly reached for her hand. He didn't know why he was doing it, but at that moment it seemed right. Lion didn't pull away. Her skin was cool, but he could feel a faint warmth emanating from her, as if she were pulling him toward. He didn't know how to explain it, but it seemed to him that this affection was inevitable. They both felt something that could not be called simple sympathy or friendship. It was more than that. It was something that permeated them both, despite all the differences. Their bodies, their cultures, their worlds, all this became unimportant in the moments when they were around.
You?
Alex began, but his voice faltered. He didn't know how to express what he was feeling. Leon looked at him, her eyes glittering in the dim light of the room. She touched his arm again, but this time her touch was more confident.
I'm here.
She whispered softly. These words, although simple, made Alex feel something more. He knew she shouldn't be here on Earth. She was from another world, and her mission, as she said, was temporary. But now, at this moment, she was here with him, and that was all that mattered. At night, when Leon went to her room, Alex sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. He couldn't ignore the fact that he had fallen in love with her. It was ridiculous, it was absurd, but it was true. He, a human, fell in love with a creature from another galaxy, a creature that should never have been a part of his life. Every morning, they continued to live as before, but now there was an invisible bond between them that was getting stronger. She didn't require words, but every gesture, every look said more than any conversation. Their affection grew despite all the barriers that should have separated them, but Alex knew the time was inexorably passing. He couldn't ignore the fact that Lion was still rebuilding her ship. Every day, her technology moved her closer to the moment when she could fly again. But it didn't matter now. They were together now, and that was all Alex wanted to know. It has been several months since Lion appeared in Alex's life. Their worlds were intertwined so deeply that it seemed as if she had always been here next to him. At first, there was an insurmountable gap between them due to their different worlds. But over time, this gap began to seem less significant. Every day they got to know each other better, and every day their bond grew stronger. But no matter how it seemed that they were able to overcome all of the differences, reality was making itself felt more and more often. And although the affection between them was strong, something invisible and inevitable was beginning to destroy their harmony. With each passing day, Alex became more acutely aware of the line that separated them. Lion was a creature from another planet. Her nature was alien to human perception, and despite all his efforts, Alex could not ignore those aspects of her essence that remained incomprehensible to him. Anxiety began to grow inside him as if his mind refused to accept the inevitability that they could not be together forever. One day, when Alex woke up early in the morning, Leon was no longer there. Her absence became a habit for him. She often got up before him and went about her business. But this time it was different. He felt like something had changed. He was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts more anxious than ever. Something elusive, like a thin thread, was pulling harder and was ready to break at any moment. Lian spent more and more time in her ship. Although they tried not to talk about what it meant, Alex knew she was preparing to leave. Her mission was temporary, and despite the fact that they had become close, her true nature and purpose drew her back to her world. Alex increasingly found himself thinking that he lived in a world where time dragged on slowly and painfully, bringing the moment he feared the most. Lian's ship was now at the center of her life. Every time Alex saw her sitting in her makeshift workshop, surrounded by strange alien tools, he felt something similar to jealousy, but it was deeper and more subtle than a simple human feeling. It was the realization that her worlds would never intersect with his. No matter what he did, no matter how strong their feelings were, they could never be together completely. Her eyes, her movements, even her touch, all this became even more valuable to him, but also even more frightening. Every morning, watching her immerse herself in the work of rebuilding the ship, Alex couldn't help but think that all this was temporary. Their love, their affection, it was all like sand flowing through your fingers. And even though they were so close, there was still this invisible barrier that couldn't be overcome. Lian had never given him false hopes. She'd been honest from the beginning, and that made it even harder for Alex. He knew that her heart, if that could be called what guided her actions, belonged to the stars. She wasn't just a guest in his world, she was an explorer who came from another planet with a purpose that was more than just their connection. Every time she returned to her ship, Alex felt that she was slowly but surely moving away from him. As the days passed, the tension grew. Outwardly, they remained calm, but inside each of them matured the realization of the inevitable end. Alex was beginning to notice how her movements were becoming more mechanical, almost aloof. She no longer looked at him with the same open joy that he had seen in her eyes in the first weeks. Now her gaze was deeper, more complex, as if she was thinking about something she couldn't put into words. One day, when Lian was sitting in her workshop again, Alex was watching her from afar. Her hands moved slowly over the strange glowing devices. She was focused. Her face expressed absolute determination. At that moment, he realized that she had returned to her original state, to who she was before they met. Her duty to her people, her planet, her mission was too strong for love to overcome it. Alex felt lost that evening. He was sitting on the porch of his house, looking at the stars that used to bring him so much joy and inspiration. Now they seemed cold and inaccessible. Each star reminded him that Lian was a part of this distant world that he would never be able to touch. He could feel his heart filling with heaviness, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find a way to come to terms with it. Despite the fact that they were close, there was always something inexpressible between them. It wasn't just differences in origin or physical appearance. It was the very essence of their existence. Lian belonged to another reality, another form of life, and no matter how hard they tried to be together, it was impossible. Alex felt that their connection was temporary, like a bright flash in the dark, beautiful but short. He often watched Lian go into the forest, disappearing among the trees. Her footsteps were light, almost noiseless. She moved like a creature that did not belong to Earth. Her presence became a kind of mirage for him. He knew that she was here, but at the same time, he understood that she should not be here. Every time she returned, he felt strangely relieved, but also alarmed. He understood that one day she would be gone forever. The time they spent together became more and more valuable, but also more and more painful. They rarely sat together at sunset, and even when they did, the silence between them was filled with tension. Alex knew that they couldn't go back to the days when ease reigned between them. Now, every moment was permeated with a sense of the approaching end. One day, when Lian left to work on the ship again, Alex stared at her silhouette for a long time, surrounded by the light of alien technology. Her image seemed to dissolve in this light, as if she no longer belonged to this world. He was aware that she was ready to leave, and it broke him. He knew he should have been grateful for the time they spent together, but instead he felt only pain. Those moments when Lian was with him now seemed ghostly. He could feel her, but her soul was already far away. She continued to work on her ship without stopping, as if she realized that their time was coming to an end. Alex could no longer find the words to express his feelings. Everything that seemed important became meaningless in the face of her imminent departure. The night before her possible departure was especially quiet. Alex was lying in his bed, unable to sleep. He knew that Lion was still in her workshop, preparing the last stage of repairs. 1,000 thoughts were spinning in his head, but none of them could calm him down. He knew he should have accepted her departure, but his heart refused to do it. As the sun began to rise above the horizon, Alex got up and went to the window. In the distance, he saw Lion standing near her ship. Her figure was shrouded in dim light. She seemed almost unreal this morning. Alex felt his heart slow down. He knew that this was the end. Lian stood motionless, her gaze fixed on the sky. Alex watched her, realizing that their paths had been sealed from the very beginning. No matter how much time they spent together, their differences were too great to be overcome. Their love, no matter how strong their feelings, was temporary, as was her stay on Earth. At that moment, Alex realized the severity of the inevitable differences that had always existed between them. It had only been a few hours since Alex realized that their time together was coming to an end. The morning found him in a state of deep internal conflict. He understood that Lion had to leave the Earth, but at the same time, he could not accept the fact that he would lose her forever. She was so much a part of his life that the very thought of her leaving seemed unbearable to him. He needed her presence, her calmness, her mystery, which he never fully understood, but which he was fascinated by. The house was quiet. Alex sat by the window and looked at Leanne, who was standing not far from her ship. Her figure, illuminated by the faint morning light, seemed almost ghostly. She seemed to be part of another reality, something far away and inaccessible to him. He could feel his heart slowing down with every move she made. Her silhouette, surrounded by a light, was both familiar and alien, as if she had already begun to withdraw from his life, having not yet physically left him. Leon stood by her ship, surrounded by the very tools she had used to rebuild it. Her movements were precise and confident, and even from this distance, Alex could sense her determination. This was the Lion he had known from the beginning. Focused, purposeful, calm, and at the same time, something in her behavior changed. She no longer seemed alien to this world. Her presence was perceived differently now. It was as if she had already become a part of his life, his home, his reality. He saw her carefully checking every element of her ship, checking panels, setting up systems. She moved with a grace that Alex had always found mesmerizing. But at that moment, he realized that her every move was bringing the moment of her departure closer. His heart was beating heavily in his chest, as if trying to resist the inevitable. But he knew that he could not stop what was about to happen. It had been a long time since Leon had first appeared in his life. These months were like another life for him, a life in which only he and she existed. Their worlds were intertwined so deeply that it seemed to him that they had always been together. But now, looking at her, he realized that he had been living in an illusion all this time. Leanne was a guest, a temporary part of his life, and now she had to go back to where she came from. But despite all this, there was something about her that bothered Alex. Her movements were precise, but they lacked the unconditional confidence he had seen before. She checked the ship with attention, but she did it slowly as if she had no ultimate goal. Alex felt that there was some delay in her actions, as if she was procrastinating with what was about to happen. The longer he looked at her, the more the feeling grew in him that something had changed. Leon, no matter how devoted she was to her mission, was no longer the cold and distant alien she had been at the beginning. During that time, she became a part of his world, and this world may have become a part of hers. There were no longer only the echoes of distant stars in her eyes. They now reflected himself, the man with whom she had spent so much time on this planet. Alex felt his hands clench into fists. He couldn't just sit and wait. His mind was racing between the realization of the need for her to leave and the inner resistance. He knew he had to let her go, but every time he tried to accept it, his heart told him otherwise. Outside, Leon finished setting up the last panel of her ship. Her figure was now illuminated by the morning sun, and Alex couldn't take his eyes off her. She stood motionless, her face pointed at the ship, but there was an uncertainty in her posture that he couldn't help but notice. She did not move, made no attempt to start the engine, although she was ready to take off. This confusion lasted for several minutes. and Alex felt everything inside him shrink with anticipation. He knew that Lion was at a crossroads. Her heart, if that was what her essence could be called, was divided between duty and something new, something that had sprung up between them over the months. It wasn't an ordinary love, it was something deeper, something that went beyond their differences. Lion turned back to the ship, her hands slowly touching the smooth surface of the panels. Alex knew that this was the moment of truth. Her decision was inevitable, and he had to accept any choice she made. But despite this, his soul screamed in pain. He didn't want to lose her. He couldn't imagine his life without her. A few moments later, Lion stopped. She stood motionless in front of her ship, her arms dropped, and Alex felt the tension around them reach a peak. Everything inside him froze, and he couldn't move, waiting for what would happen next. And suddenly, she slowly walked away from the ship. Her steps were unhurried but confident. Alex couldn't believe his eyes. Lian broke away from the ship and headed back to the house. Her figure, illuminated by the morning light, seemed light, almost airy, but there was a certain determination in her walk that he could not ignore. She didn't hesitate anymore. Lian walked up to the porch and stopped for a moment, her eyes meeting Alex's. At that moment, all words were superfluous. He didn't know what she had decided, but her actions spoke louder than any words. She made the decision to stay. Alex felt his heart stop and then start pounding with renewed vigor. Her choice needed no explanation. She chose not to return to her planet, not to fly back to the stars. She chose him. At that moment, his whole life, all his fears and doubts disappeared. There was only one thing left. Lian chose to stay with him, despite all the differences, despite her belonging to another world. She had given up her duty for something more for the two of them. Her decision was quiet. Like everything she didn't demand attention, she didn't ask for recognition. She just was. And that was the most important. Now that she had made her choice, Alex realized that all their differences, all those barriers that seemed insurmountable, no longer mattered. They were together, and that was all that mattered. The silence that surrounded them was almost sacred. The sun rose higher and higher, filling the world with light, and Alex felt his heart fill with warmth. He knew that there were many challenges ahead of them. Their lives will not be easy, and the world will never fully accept them. But now, at this moment, it didn't matter. They were together, and Lion made the decision to stay. The time they spent together was not just an accident. It had become something more than either of them could have imagined. Their worlds were separated by millions of light years, but their hearts were united on Earth, in this small house surrounded by silence and light. Now that Lion had made her choice, Alex knew they could overcome everything. Lian's decision to stay on Earth changed everything. The moment she turned away from her ship and slowly returned to Alex, his heart stopped beating in that chaotic rhythm that had accompanied him for the past few weeks. Her choice was clear, and he broke down that invisible wall that seemed to separate their worlds forever. Now that she was left, their lives had to start anew, in a new way, with a different reality, with the understanding that their destinies were more intertwined than one might have imagined. The first days after her decision became a time of deep immersion in a new reality for both of them. Alex still woke up early, but now Lian was with them. She no longer spent hours in her workshop working on the ship or sneaking off into the woods to think about her future. Now all her attention was focused on living next to him on their new common life. And although they hadn't discussed it out loud, Alex felt that Lion had accepted her new role here on Earth. Every morning began with them silently drinking coffee on the porch, watching the sun slowly rise over their small house. The silence between them was calm and full of meaning. Earlier, when Lynn was just a guest in his life, Alex often caught himself thinking that this silence was painful, full of unexpressed tension. Now, it was different. This silence was filled with deep mutual understanding. They no longer needed words, because their every look, every touch said more than sounds could ever express. Lian studied this new world as if it were completely unfamiliar to her. All there was a mixture of surprise and childish joy in her eyes. Alex often found himself watching her as she touched the flowers in the garden, felt the wind on her face, or watched the birds flying over them. He saw how her fingers gently touched the leaves, how her eyes followed the smallest movements in nature, how she listened to the sounds of the earth as if trying to immerse herself in the very essence of life on this planet. Her every action seemed meditative, almost ritualistic. She didn't just exist here, she became a part of this world, an organic extension of it. Alex often thought that she looked like a tree that had taken root in the ground. Her presence was calm, balanced, but at the same time it was becoming more and more profound. She became more and more integrated with this world, turning every moment of her life into an art of adaptation. But despite this, Alex could not completely forget that Lion was different. Her body, her essence, remained alien, and that was part of the magnetism that drew him to her. She seemed to be a creature from another reality, and even when they were together, this feeling did not disappear. On the contrary, it became even more tangible, but it no longer frightened him as before. It was something natural now, as if her alien nature was just part of what made her so special. Over time, they began to build a common routine. Lian, although she didn't need food in the same sense as humans, was now enjoying the simple pleasures of human life. Alex taught her how to cook, and although her first attempts were clumsy, over time she began to find joy in these ordinary things. He remembered how one day they were cooking breakfast together, and she, concentrating on chopping vegetables, suddenly stopped, lost in her thoughts. Alex felt that she was thinking about her past, about life in another world, but now these memories did not cause her longing as they had before. Lion was becoming a part of his daily routine, but at the same time she was bringing something completely new to it. She transformed the house, once filled with loneliness, into something lively and saturated. Now that they were together, Alex felt that their lives had acquired a depth that had not existed before. Every day was filled with the discovery of something new, as if he lived not only on Earth but also in its world, in the space between the stars. But this new life was not without difficulties. Lion was still a mystery to Alex. Her nature, her perception of time and space were different from humans, and although she had learned to adapt to their lives, some things remained alien to her. For example, she didn't feel tired the way Alex did. Her body didn't need sleep as much as a human's, but sometimes she still spent nights lying next to him, just to be a part of his world. Alex often woke up in the middle of the night and saw Lion sitting by the window looking at the stars. Her face was calm, but there was something more in her gaze, as if she was longing for something far away and unattainable. Despite her best efforts to become a part of the Earth, her heart was still connected to space. It was something Alex couldn't change, and even though he understood it, he still felt a slight pain every time he saw her in such moments. Over time, their bond has deepened. Lion and Alex didn't need words to understand each other. She could just look at him and he knew how she felt. Their touches became even more meaningful, filled with that intimacy that could not be conveyed through simple communication.